Today's episode comes to you courtesy of my amazing patrons. Once a month, patrons vote on what commander that they'd like to see in an upcoming episode. The commander that gets the most votes wins. And the commander that got the most votes this month is actually an Omega level commander, which is an incredibly powerful commander that is a massive threat. And the Omega level commander that they chose for this month is Ivy Gleeful Spellthief. Ivy is a 2/1 fairy rogue with flying that costs green-blue. It has, whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than Ivy, you may copy that spell. The copy targets Ivy. And then there's some reminder text that a copy of an aura spell becomes a token, and yeah, there are some really crazy and off-the-wall things that you can do with this unique commander. And a uniquely powerful one at that, because whether it's you or your opponents, if anyone is targeting a single creature other than this one, you can choose to actually, duplicate that spell and target Ivy with it. Now, of course, there are going to be certain times you're not going to want to do that. I mean, if someone is casting, say again, a Swords to Plowshares to take out a creature, you probably don't want to target Ivy with that. That being said, there are plenty of spells out there that players are casting to, benefit their own creatures. I mean, just think about like a Voltron style deck. If you're playing against a Voltron deck that utilizes a bunch of auras, like Earl the Miststalker, for every single one of those auras, you get a copy that is attached to Ivy. Now, can we plan for that? No, but you don't have to plan for that to still make this an incredibly powerful deck. Because essentially, even with just your spells, you can get double the value out of them, and there's some pretty crazy things that you can do with this commander. Now, every single card in this deck, actually including the commander, is going to be less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck. And as I take you through the cards on this episode, I'm going to be taking you through different tactics to show you how this deck works and how we're going to win with it. And of course, if you are interested in this deck, make sure you check out the deck list link in the description below. And now with all that said, let's jump into it. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 to tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. And then some other great turn 2 plays come with Search for Tomorrow and Font of Fertility. Search for Tomorrow has to spend 2 for a green to get to stay basic and play untapped, and Font of Fertility is kind of like an enchantment version of Wayfarer's Bauble. Next up, we've also got some other enchantments that can help us out though with Wild Growth and Fertile Ground. Wild Growth is going to enchant a land, and whenever that land is tapped for mana, its controller adds additional green, and Fertile Ground basically is the exact same thing, but it can be 1 mana of any color. Now, keep in mind, we do have some effects that do care about enchantments, so additionally adding, more enchantments into our ramp slots is a great thing. But of course, we also have a creature that can help us out with Sakura Tribe Elder. We can sacrifice to get a basic land and put it in play tapped. Next up, we're also going to be running Rampant Growth, which can just say basic and play tapped, and Edge of Autumn, which does the exact same thing if we've got 4 fewer lands, or we can cycle it away by sacrificing a land. And finally, we've got Cultivate, which gets us 2 basics. 1 comes into play tapped, and 1 goes into our hand. But actually, we've got some other ways to ramp outside of these. And a few of those ways actually come with Parcel Beast, Migratory Greathorn, and Auspicious Sterix, each of which have Mutate, which is incredible with Ivy. So as an example, let's read from Parcel Beast, pay green-blue. If you cast this spell for its mutate cost, put it over or under target non-human creature you own, they mutate the creature on top plus all abilities from under it. So if we mutate this, we are targeting a creature, and when we target one that's not Ivy, we get to copy it. And yes, that means we get a copy of the actual permanent that we mutate onto Ivy as well, because again, Ivy is not human, so it is a legal target. So we essentially double mutate, which has a ton of potential. Now with Parcel Beast specifically, I mean, that potential is more limited, but still, it can still be very helpful. Pay 1, tap, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may put it on the battlefield. If you don't put the card on the battlefield, put it in your hand. So a great way to either ramp or get additional card advantage. But the potential with mutate can be really seen in a card like Migratory Greathorn, a 3/4 mutate for 2 and a green. When it mutates, search your library basic land card, put it on the battlefield, tap, then shuffle your library. So again, with our mutating, we get to get that trigger, again for the creature we're mutating onto, and then again for Ivy, which we also mutate onto. So with this example, basically double ramp, which is incredible. Speaking of which, Auspicious Sterix is a 6/6 with mutate for 5 and a green, and it says whenever this creature mutates, exile cards to the top of your library to exile X permanent cards, so X the number of times this creature is mutated. Put those cards onto the battlefield. So yeah, that can really add up throughout the game and get us a ton of things off the top of our library for free. Moving on, let's talk about Sea Dasher Octopus, which we can mutate for 1 in a blue. It's got a flash and says, whenever this creature goes combination to a player, draw a card. So getting this on a creature, and then especially also on our commander, can be a great way to get a lot of card advantage throughout the game, because again, keep in mind, our commander does have flying. Speaking of flying, we also got Dream Tail Heron, a flyer that says, whenever this creature mutates, draw a card. So yeah, that can really add up throughout the game, again, just by mutating this once, that is draw 2. Also, another more brutal way, though, to get some value is with Souvenir Snatcher. It has flying, and whenever this creature mutates, gain control of target non-creature artifact. So we can steal a lot of things, including our opponent's mana rocks, with this. Or, you know, we can just get rid of their mana rocks with Gem Razor, a 4/4 with reach and trample, and when it mutates, destroy target artifact or enchantment opponent controls. Speaking of destroying things, there's Sawtuck Demolisher, a 6/6 with trample, and when it mutates, destroy target non-creature permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Again, we've got a lot of ways to get a lot of use out of these mutate creatures, and we can take down our opponents with them quite effectively. So we're also going to be running Pouncing Shore Shark, which has flash, and when it mutates, you may return target creature and opponent controls to its owner's hand. Next up, there's Archipelagore, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced that, it's a tough word to say. It was a 7/7 that has, when it mutates, tap up to X target creatures, for X the number of times this creature's mutated. Those creatures don't tap during their controller's next untap step. So this can make our commander absolutely massive, a 7/7, and again, it gets to keep the flying, and of course, when we keep mutating with this, we are tapping down a lot of creatures and keeping them tapped down for quite some time. Speaking of creatures, we can also make a massive army with Trumpeting Gnar, a 3/3 that says whenever this creature mutates, create a 3/3 green beast creature token. And we can also make creatures massive that we're mutating onto with Glowstone Recluse. It says whenever this creature mutates, put 2/1 counters on it. So if we keep mutating on top of our commander, this can make it incredibly deadly. And speaking of deadly, there's one other, well, kind of unexpected thing that we can really utilize mutate for. And that would be, with mutating, we can really utilize some clones like, well, Clone, Mirror Image, and Undercover Operative to a fantastic degree. Clones, like the original Clone, says you may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield. Now, normally, you know, getting a copy of our commander really wouldn't work out because our commander is legendary, so unfortunately that just wouldn't work. But when we mutate onto Ivy, again, we can choose to put that mutated creature either on top or underneath the mutated creature. And they mutate into the creature on top plus all abilities from under it. So again, with that last example of Glowstone Recluse, if we mutate it on top of Ivy, now Ivy is, well, no longer Ivy, it's Glowstone Recluse, which is a spider, and not a legendary spider at that. Now that Glowstone Recluse still has its own abilities as well as everything under it, which includes, of course, Ivy's abilities, so, you know, again, flying, and then also, more importantly, whenever a player casts a spell that targets only a single creature other than this one, you may copy that spell targets it. Because again, just a rules reminder, when a creature is, you know, referencing itself with its name, it's just meaning, you know, this card. That's what it means. It doesn't mean specifically that name. Regardless, the main thing that is important here is, again, by mutating the Glowstone Recluse or whatever mutate creature on top of Ivy, it's not going to be legendary anymore. Which means we can get more copies of it in play safely with things like Clone. And then we essentially have, you know, 2 Ivies that aren't Ivies on the battlefield. So again, whenever we cast anything that targets any of our other creatures, we get to copy that spell twice. So of course, we also have, you know, Mirror Image. Enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature we control, or Undercover Operative, which is basically a clone, but if we copy one of our own creatures, we get a shield counter on it too. So yeah, having multiple copies of Ivy can be an incredibly deadly thing. So with that said, we also have some spells that can help us out as well with Repudiate, Replicate, Croaking Counterpart, and Replication Technique. Repudiate can counter target activate or triggered ability, but more importantly, we can Replicate, which is going to be create a token that's a copy target creature we control. Which, keep in mind, we can target another creature other than Ivy and still target Ivy too. Which again, if Ivy isn't, you know, really Ivy, but a mutated creature, we get an additional copy of Ivy too. And we can get even more copies of the Croaking Counterpart, which is going to create a token that's a copy target non-frog creature, except it's a 1/1 green frog, which we can also flash back. Now, yes, will that creature be probably weaker just as a 1/1? Sure, but that really doesn't matter all that much because we can get even more value out of it by getting additional copy in play. Because again, by having another copy of Ivy, no matter how small it is, can be incredibly impactful and provide us a ton of value. Speaking of which, we've got Replication Technique, which we can demonstrate to get initial copy by giving an opponent initial copy, and it says create a token that's a copy of target permanent you control. So yeah, this can help us out in a wide variety of circumstances, but yes, it's another way to get initial copies out of Ivy when they're mutated. You know what I mean. And speaking of clones, we've got one that works in a very interesting way with Protean Thaumaturge. It has Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, you may have it become a copy of another target creature, except it has this ability. Again, like I mentioned before, and we'll talk about here in a bit, enchantments can be very impactful in this deck as well, and yeah, with this, we can change this around to whatever we need to change it to, including our mutated commander. Next up, we've got some other Constellation cards that can really help us out too, though, with Nessian Wanderer, Eutropia, and Shoal Kraken. Nessian Wanderer says, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under control, you lead top 3 cards of your library, you may reveal a land card from among them, put it in your hand, and put the rest of them in your library in a random order. This can provide us a lot of card advantage throughout the game, helping us hit our land drops. I mean, just think about, when you play an Aura, you get 2 copies of it essentially, and yeah, 2 triggers off this to get a lot of lands off the top. And of course, we'll talk about a lot of fantastic auras here in a bit, but first up, Eutropia says, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1 counter on target creature. That creature gains flying until end of turn. So this can of course help get one of our creatures through, and also, we can just keep using this to pump Ivy a ton. And then the Kraken helps out in a different way. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under control, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. So when those enchantments enter the battlefield, we can loot a ton with this. But next up, we also have some creatures that can help us out in a different way, because we've got some creatures that actually want to be the targets of spells. And let's start things off with Artisan of Forms. A 1/1 human wizard with Heroic. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Artisan of Forms, you may have it become a copy of target creature and gain this ability. So this is somewhat similar to Protean Thaumaturge, which can be a great clone throughout the game that we can switch to whatever we need to, including our mutated commander. And then Spellwild Oath helps out in a different way. Spells that target it cost 2 less to play, so yeah, we can just get a ton of cost savings by targeting this, and again, getting double the value out of that card by getting a copy for our commander. Or again, even more value if we've got clones of our commander too. Next up, how about Triton Cavalry, which says, whenever you cast a spell that targets it, you may return targeted enchantment to its owner's hand. So this can bounce back our opponent's enchantments, or again, keep in mind, if we are again utilizing auras for value, and again making copies of those with our commander, we can actually just keep bouncing back an aura to our hand and recasting it. Or should I say auras? We can bounce auras and recast them. You know what I mean. But of course, we've also got other ways to generate a lot of value with Storm Chaser Drake, Triton Fortune Hunter, and Gnarlback Rhino. Each of these essentially draws us a card whenever we target them with a spell. So yeah, these are some fantastic targets to generate a lot of card advantage. But now let's move on to talk about those auras, which can be incredible in this deck, because again, our commander can make additional copies of them essentially with cards like Frog Tongue, Rune of Might, and Cartouche of Knowledge. Now, Frog Tongue might not seem like all that much. It is an aura that just costs a green, and it says when it enters battlefield, draw a card. An enchant creature can block creatures with flying. So basically, yeah, reach. But again, if we target a creature other than our commander, we are getting that plus the copy of it that goes onto our commander, and we are drawing 2 for the price of 1. On top of whatever, other benefits we might get, from constellation cards, or again, those creatures that actually want to be targeted. So we're also going to be drawing some cards with Rune of Might, which when it's battlefield, we draw a card, and as long as the enchanted permanent is a creature, gets +1/+1 and has trample. Which of course can be very impactful with our commander. We've already talked about ways to actually grow our commander, with mutate creatures, and we'll talk about some other ways to grow it here in a bit as well. Next up, there's Cartouche of Knowledge, which is very similar. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card, enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has flying. Which, of course, that flying won't benefit our commander, but it can benefit what other creature we attach this to. Next up, Karametra's Favor is going to enter the battlefield and draw us a card as well, and it says enchanted creature has tap at 1 mana of any color. So this can make 2 of our creatures, and including our commander, into mana dorks, and yeah, we can just utilize this mana right away. Next up, there's Aqueous Form, which says enchanted creature can't be blocked, which can be huge with our commander, and on top of that, whenever enchanted creature attacks, scry 1. So some fantastic card selection on top of getting our creatures through. Speaking of getting through, there's Combat Research, which says enchanted creature has whether this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And on top of that, as long as the enchanted creature is legendary, gets +1 and has Ward 1. So this can protect our commander, pump it, and also give us a lot of card advantage throughout the game. Again, our commander does have flying, so we can get through pretty easily on a lot of players. So we're also going to be running Curiosity, Keen Sense, and Sixth Sense, all of which are very similar. Curiosity and Keen Sense are whenever enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card, and Sixth Sense specifies combat damage, but again, for our commander, this is basically the exact same. Moving on, we've got some other low-to-the-ground enchantments like Fate Foretold, Bequeathal, and Rancor. Fate Foretold says, as it enters the battlefield, draw a card, and when an enchanted creature dies, its controller draws a card. So this has the potential of actually drawing us 4 cards. It'll draw us 2 right away, and then 2 potentially. Speaking of the potential draw a ton of cards, there's Bequeathal, which says whenever an enchanted creature dies, draw 2 cards. This is just 1 mana, and again, we can get 2 copies of it, So basically, again, when our creatures die, if that happens, we can draw 4 cards for just 1 mana. And then Rancor is actually an aura that we can keep getting back. It's going to give enchanted creature +2/+0 and trample. Whenever it's put in a grave from the battlefield, we get it back to our hand. So if we attach this to a creature, and again get a copy of it attached to our commander, if that creature goes away, we get this back, and yeah, we can get it back on our commander and another creature. And yeah, this can be a lot of value throughout the game. But of course, aside from these lower to the ground auras, we also have some massive ones too. First up, let's talk about Verdant Embrace. Enchant creature. Enchant creature gets +3/+3, and it has at the beginning of each upkeep create a 1/1 green sapperling creature token. So this is a great way to pump one of our creatures and our commander, and of course, again, this is every single upkeep. Every single upkeep, not just our own, we get a 1/1 sapperling. And again, with this on our commander and another creature, that's 2 triggers, so we get 2 sapperlings every single turn. So essentially, for each trip around the table, again in a multiplayer format like Commander, we are going to be getting 8 sapperlings, and yeah, we can fill the board incredibly quickly with something like this. Next up, we can also make our commander massive and take out our opponents with Auramancer's Guise. It says enchant creature gets +2/+2 for each aura attached to it and has vigilance. So this lets us freely swing out with our commander and the other creature we're attaching this to as well, and it can make them absolutely massive, easily turning our commander into a 2-shot KO and eventually maybe even a 1-shot KO. And speaking of a 1-shot KO, well, there's Colossification, which says enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Enchant creature gets +20/+20. So this will tap down one of our creatures as well as our commander, but it's going to make them massive. And keep in mind, just with this attached to our commander is going to be a 22/21, which of course makes it into a 1-shot KO on anyone. Yeah, this is definitely the quickest and most straightforward approach to commander damaging out an opponent. Now, as good as these cards are, there's still one in my opinion that stands above the rest, and that is the Golden Pig of this deck, which is the #1 card out of 99. And the Golden Pig for this deck is Corrupted Conscience. It's an aura that costs 3 blue, and it says enchant creature. You control enchanted creature. Enchanted creature has infect. So first up, this can be a fantastic way to steal one of our opponent's creatures and yeah, give it infect. So whatever the best creature is on the board that our opponents control, we just take it and now we make it even deadlier. But again, our commander does not care whether we're targeting one of our creatures or one of our opponent's creatures. We get that trigger, so we also can get a copy of this on our commander. Which, of course, that first part, you control enchanted creature, really doesn't matter all that much. We already control our commander, but more importantly, the enchanted creature has infect. So, yeah, now our commander has infect, and as a, flying, evasive commander that we can pump in a wide variety of ways, we can easily turn our commander into a 2-shot KO, and very easily as well turn into a 1-shot KO once we're set up properly. So yeah, just playing this card can really turn things around for us, can cause a massive swing in the game, and yeah, can also help us easily take out our opponents. Corrupted Conscience, in my opinion, you are definitely the Golden Pig of this deck. But we're actually not quite done with auras just yet. Because we've also got some that can help us out in a different way, and let's start with some Umbras with Spider, Eel, and Boar. Spider Umbra says enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has reach, and it's got totem armor. So if our enchanted creature be destroyed, instead remove all damage from it and destroy this aura. So Umbras can of course be a fantastic way to protect our creatures, including our commander, because our commander is getting a copy of these. So next up there's Eel Umbra, which has flash, and it gets +1/+1, and the most important thing though, again, totem armor. An even bigger one though is Boar Umbra. Enchanted creature gets +3/+3, and of course most importantly, totem armor. But our best Umbra might be the last one with Snake Umbra. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature deals damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. So again, kind of like a curiosity with a pump effect, and of course on top of that, the totem armor to protect our creatures. Speaking of protection, we've also have Shielding Plaques, which has when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Enchanted creature can't be the target of spells or abilities your opponents control. So this is basically hexproof on our creatures, and on top of that, we get to draw 2 cards again when this comes into play, thanks to our commander copying it. Next up, there's Canopy Cover, which says enchanted creature can't be blocked except by creatures flying or reach. Enchanted creature can't be the targets of spell abilities your opponents control. So another great way to protect our creatures, and also to get our other creatures through. But we can also protect ourselves in a different way by actually getting cards back with Creeping Renaissance. It says choose a permanent type, return all cards of the chosen type from your graveyard to your hand. And we can actually flash it back again, so yeah, this can be a great way to get back a ton of auras to get even more value out of them. And speaking of getting things back, well, we can bounce a non-land permanent with Alchemist Retrieval, and if we cleave it, we can bounce any non-land permanent, not just our own. And when it comes to removal, we also have Beast Within, which can destroy any target permanent its controller gets a 3/3 green beast, and Aether Gale can bounce a lot of things, return 6 target non-land permanents back to their owner's hands. But now that we've talked about every single non-land card in this deck, let's talk about the lands. First up, we've got Command Tower, which can tap for either our colors, and Exotic Orchard, which can do so most of the time, and then there's Ash Barrens, which has basic land cycling for 1. Up next, we've got 3 lands that can be sacrificed to go get a forest or an island and a blade tapped, and Broker's Hideout is actually going to gain us 1 life when it does so. Next up, we actually have some lands that can help ramp us with Mirrored Landscape and Blighted Woodland, which we can sacrifice to get 2 basics and a blade tapped. And then we've got some lands that can tap for each of our colors with Yavimaya Coast, which can tap for each of our colors but deals 1 damage to us. Temple of Mystery, which enters battlefield tapped, is going to have a Scry 1. And then Symphonic Growth Chamber, which enters battlefield tapped, bounce a land back to our hand, but it taps for each of our colors at the same time. Next up, we've got a land that can actually clone one of our creatures with Jar of Mirror Lake, and then Rogue's Passage, which can help get our creatures through. Finally, though, we're going to round out lands with our basics with forests and islands. And now that we've talked about every single card in this deck, let's talk about the price. Like I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, every single card in this deck, including the commander, is less than $1, so it's a very budget-friendly deck, coming in at an estimated cost of just $30.01. And actually, with that estimated cost, the basic lands for it are counted at 10 cents a piece, so if you already got those basics, there's some extra savings for you there. And speaking of potential extra savings, you might be able to save even more by buying this deck on TCG Player and utilizing heavily played and damaged cards, which of course need a home too. Though do keep in mind that this estimated cost does not include the cost of shipping, which might vary depending upon where you live. And with that, the show has come to a close, so it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what your thoughts on this episode are, and as always, thank you again, and have a good one. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. We also have a ton of brand new t-shirt designs in stock, so make sure you check out those as well. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG Player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support.